going to finish up with part two of the economics of slavery. So we left off in the last screencast with the phrase permanent involuntary hereditary servitude, which means this is permanent, it's involuntary against your will, it's genetics. Your children will also be subjected to this treatment and servitude, slavery. So when I use the phrase PIHS, that's what I want you to think about. And so just a quick recap here with regard to the black codes. So here we see a zoomed in version. So this was the one mentioned in the prior screencast. In Virginia, they declare that a mother's status determines whether the child is free or not. So that was a reversal. This was addressed in part one of the screencast. So for the most part, you have a series of laws that are passed at the state level. Here we see Massachusetts. Here we see New York, New Jersey, recognizing slavery. They're forbidding interracial marriage. So the slave codes slowly take away the status, because remember, the first Africans coming here were indentured servants, which means at some point they're going to be free. And the laws that we are looking at here are the laws that eventually lead to permanent involuntary hereditary servitude. So that was addressed in the last screencast. Also in the last screencast, the reference to the involvement of the slave trade on the part of Africans going into the interior. So this is from the book, I believe, by Lerone Bennett, Before the Mayflower, who uses this particular argument. Here they talk about that particular argument here about selling people who fell under their political, economic, military, cultural hegemony into bondage. So we have Africans also participating in the transatlantic slave trade. Anyway, so let's get back to the economics here. So this section is going to look at transportation. And again, I have to keep repeating this, not trying to upset anybody about utilization of math when looking at slavery. But the goal here is to look at the impact that the economics involved in the slave trade play in influencing the government. So there seems to be a lot of money being made here, and business owners are probably unwilling to pressure government to make change because they're looking at this from the point of view of business as opposed to looking at it through the lens of humanity. So in this scenario, you have a slave ship capacity of 500. Here you see the cost of slaves. And, this is trying to get you to think about how many are you going to take over the Atlantic to the New World. So there actually is two terms that you want to take note of, loose pack and tight pack. And the difference being, we're looking at a, top-down version of a slave ship, and we're packing individuals very tightly. So a tightly packed ship looks like this, where you see the, human beings close to each other. If we were to take the same one and maybe split, giving people this amount of room, you're bringing less people, and that is not going to be profitable. The fact that they actually have these terms is very telling about the amount of money that is involved in this particular institution here. Here is an image from a museum at DC. This museum, I don't know if they've taken this exhibit out, but it definitely wasn't there last year. I don't know if they're going to put it in the African American History Museum, but they're giving you a visual of what the tight packing situation could look like. And this journey is going to take 3 months. And so for 3 months, you are with 3 other individuals, packed tightly and expected to survive. So when we look here, the more you take, the more individuals are probably not going to make the journey because of the conditions. And again, we're looking at the math here to come to some understanding about the amount of money involved. Here we see a cross section of a ship, and this is the area that was zoomed in, the top-down version, where you see all of the cargo. So again, not trying to upset anybody about the institution of slavery or trying to, use math to upset anybody, but the argument's going to be made that the ships cost money, and so the shipbuilder is probably not going to have any interest in trying to pressure the government, because he's probably looking at it through the lens of money as opposed to looking at it through the lens of the African being a human being. Here you see all of the supplies, and so there definitely seems to be money involved in the slave trade, which is part of the reason why this is going to last for so long. So in this scenario here, the more you take, it's likely that more people are not going to make it. So you want to think about how horrific that experience can be in this scenario. And I'm making up these numbers. If you bring over 400, 150 do not make the journey. You're definitely going to be conscious of that fact. And the point that people were actually considering this says a lot about the approach and feelings and attitude towards slavery. Here we see some advertisements. And again, if you have a place that they're auctioning off human beings, that individual has an economic interest invested in the institution of slavery. This individual is probably not going to be concerned about ending slavery, because that is going to come at the expense of that person's, well-being, their money. The dozens in slavery. This is an interesting argument here. So this comes from this particular study. You can see the author up here, and they talk about the dozens. So the dozens is a slave term, and you come to find out that slaves you can buy by the dozen at a cheaper price if the 12 slaves have some sort of condition. So let's just say in this scenario here, I don't know, this individual has an arm injury, this individual has a leg injury, and so on. The dozens, these individuals are viewed as inferior. And now this simply just plays off like a system of stratification within the institution of slavery. So if we're looking at a caste system within slavery, you would probably have the field slave who is out working in the field and has a horrible life of labor. And you have the house slave who is in the house with the master. And if you're one of the dozens, you're down here. So the dozens is a game, and it's poking fun, clowning at the dozens, because maybe this is a way to feel better about your own circumstances. As it says here, for a black to be sold as part of the dozens was the lowest blow possible. And so this plays out. So the author here is trying to connect rap music as well as the dozens game, and say that the dozens game that may or may not be played within Black cultural groups in America has its origins in slavery. You're making fun of the dozens, which is why you're going to make fun of somebody else. Your mama jokes, the dozens, these are all terms. But again, it has its origins back into the slave trade. Here I just included this photograph again. When you own a business, you have to have registration with the government. And so this individual, if you think about this process here, they have a place that is auctioning slaves. This owner has to go to the government, and the government has to issue whatever licensing is necessary, which shows that there is a lot involved in this. The government's involved in this, the banks. What if you need a bank loan? The bank is profiting off this institution. So government officials are involved, banks are involved, and here you have the store owner. And don't forget about the ship, the transportation on the ship. So again, like, none of these individuals are going to want to change. And as far as a politician's concerned, the politician is probably going to be at the mercy of what his constituents want. And if his constituents are supportive of an institution because there's money to be made, then they're probably not going to pressure the government, which again is part of the reason why this institution lasts so long. Which is why I started out with the question, was slavery about race, politics, or economics? This situation, it just seems to get bizarre. Again, and it points at how sad slavery had to be, and horrific, that there's a lot of mechanisms at play here. When I asked the question about transportation, I don't even think I broke it down by male and female. And so here, it might be a situation for you to breed slaves and breed slaves with the intent of selling. And it's just terrible. So when we see here, females are selling for 12 and males are selling for 6, there's a reason for that, because you can possibly breed the female. And, that would be one of one other element to the institution of slavery. In this situation, you are the plantation owner. And, working through the math is just here to try to get you to think about the amount of money that's being made. You have to produce a certain amount per week, and that is going to require you to have a labor force. Now, again, I'm not advocating on behalf of the institution. Just trying to get you, again, to think about the impact that money has in influencing government officials. There seems to be a lot of money invested in this institution of slavery, which is part of the reason why this institution is going to last so long. Like, think about this question here. If you start breeding a female slave at 14, how many can you have by age 20, 30? The fact that individuals would think this way is very telling about the institution of slavery, very telling about the possible genocidal acts that slavery was for that time period. Out of your 100 slaves, 20 begin defying your orders, which starts to spread to other slaves. So now we're getting into this issue of slave breaking. What you're looking at here is a receipt from a slave breaking service. So if you were somebody who owned slaves but did not have the humanity inside of you to, or you did have the humanity and you did not want to beat your slave, you could hire somebody to break your slave. When we look at this particular reading here, which comes from the piece Make Them Stand in Fear, this almost reads like a step-by-step method for controlling your slave. So here we see the steps: submission, implant inferiority, show the master's power, and accept the master's good behavior. So you want to implant inferiority. You want to have the individual believe, in this case the slave, that they're inferior and that their entire life for survival is dependent on the slave master. And that would be intentional, because you, in a sense, have broken this individual where they now need you for their survival. And if you want them to behave, these individuals, these human beings, you reward them. Accept the master's good behavior standards. So that's what this is here. It's a step-by-step process on how to keep your slave in line, which, when we hear the phrase uppity, that would be a reference to a slave not following the master's orders. Here we see some statistics. Just think about the amount of money involved, considering the pounds of cotton that's being produced through the institution of slavery. So what's your conclusion about this? Why does slavery exist for so long? Keep in mind, this is just one part. This is the economics of slavery. The next class will probably start looking at the politics of slavery and what politicians were doing. And then we need to figure out, where's the racial issue come into play? Was slavery all about money, politics, or racism? Can it be one isolated, or is it a combination of the three, or does one lead to the other? One last note, you might want to take a look at the song Can't Trust It by Public Enemy, because they do make a reference to items that were mentioned in the screencast as well as in class. So I'll just kind of analyze some of the things here. When he talks about the motherland, this is a reference to Africa. King in Chief probably had a big beef is a reference to the African tribes selling their own African brothers and sisters to Europeans during the Triangle slave trade. So the artist here is saying, because of that, now I grit my teeth. So he's upset about that particular process. Let's see, I'm not going to address all of these items here. Reference here to the 3-month journey blood in the wood and its mine. That's the tight packing. There's a section here. It says 3 months past, they brand a label on my hash, identifying that slave as property to the individual. Rolling in my own leftover, which goes back to tight packing. You have 4 people in that slave ship in that area for 3 months, and when he rolls over, he's rolling in his own leftover. So that's looking at defecation, and that's what the reference is there. When he rolls over in somebody else. So that's that reference to tight packing. This section right here, 427 to the year, do you understand, is a reference to an argument that you hear often, the 400 years of oppression experienced by African Americans, and that will definitely be an issue that we will address in class. So that's it on the economics of slavery. Again, not trying to upset anybody about the approach. Next class, we'll start looking at the politics, and you could see which one or which combination you think mattered most. That's it.